We're back with Season 9, Episode 14, The Last Laugh. This is about the Joker who decides he's going to make... this is actually about Pinkie Pie questioning her one true purpose in the thing that I can't think of the name of. In life. That's the thing that I couldn't think of the name of. I mean, I don't have a life personally, so I have no experience with this. And as a direct consequence, she decides to go reach out to Weird Al Yankovic. And then we have some Weird Al Yankovic stuff, so that's kind of normal. There's a bit towards the beginning where she says, you know, you really need to look behind you more often. I actually bothered to rewind the episode just to see if I somehow missed her in the background somewhere. She was not in the background somewhere. It turns out Cheese Sandwich made a factory. Interesting. Cool. And Pinkie mentions that all of you found your own things. This is actually something I've been talking about since we've been covering Season 1. How some of the characters had built-in, baked-in ambitions, and several of them kind of fulfilled them over the course of the series. What's interesting to me, too, is that, as Pinkie points out, this is also true for characters who didn't have ambitions to begin with. Twilight didn't want to become ruler of Equestria, but that is effectively where that's going. That is her ambition at this point. Fluttershy didn't really want to come up with an animal sanctuary, but it kind of lines up pretty neatly with her character, and you get the idea. So everyone has had some kind of fulfillment with this line, except for Pinkie. I do like how she's like, Applejack, you have your hat! Let's be honest, Applejack is the only one who had her ambition fulfilled before the show even started. She runs the farm, and everything that entails, which is a lot, so she's done. Like, she's good, you know? Yeah, we've literally had flashback episodes where we cover when it was still an ambition for her, as opposed to a realized ambition. So, I just want to mention something super quick. I do like this episode, and it's nice to see Pinkie Pie being smart and quirky, as opposed to stupid and quirky, or rude and quirky. So, thumbs up from me on that front. So we get to the factory, and no one goes in, and no one goes out. How would that work, exactly? Like, the workers need to come and go, and, you know, they've got shifts, and... Anyways, let's just ignore that for the moment, because, let's be honest, we know what they're going for here. They're going for a Charlie and the Chocolate Factory kind of a vibe. Gotta have the Willy Wonka thing. What's funny is they abandoned the Willy Wonka thing almost immediately. Did you catch that? There's like the big thing, and oh my god, we hit the button, and everyone goes in, and then they abandoned it almost immediately after that. Shrug. That's referential humor, by the way. We've already had unexpected humor, we've had timing humor, and referential humor. So, forgive me for being the boring, dull geek that I am. But one of the things I made it a point of doing several years ago, and have continued my studies of ever since, is the study and analysis. Hang on, let me get my most dry, boring voice going here. The study and analysis of humor. Because, yeah, no, I'm saying smirk. Sorry. Because it is a science. Because there is actual formula to humor. There always has been, at least as far as we're aware of. And I've actually been able to part and parcel several bits of this very show, as well as some movies we've covered and some games we've covered about what they were doing and how they were doing it and why they were doing it. Which leads us to this. So Sans shows up, and he has this nice, calm, scientific approach to thing. So this tracks. He said, we have a fairly serious approach to comedy here, everything. And you'll notice that this is Equestria. I was actually going to mention that. This is Equestria, so Sans is actually a good guy instead of being what he could have been. It would have been so easy for him to be your typical stereotypical middle manager type, right? Which is either straight up the villain or just, you know, at the very least an obstacle to the overall endeavors of the characters, right? Instead, he is the straight man. That's usually me when it comes to comedic duos. Like, Pax and I can get people laughing like crazy, but the thing is, he's the jokester, I'm the straight man. For those of you who don't understand the concept of the straight man, because analysis of humor, what you do is you have one character who is wacky or silly or ridiculous or off the wall or something, lazy, violent. You can do whatever. They have to be distended in some way. They have to be abnormal in some way. Then you have the straight man. This is the normal person. This person is here to react to this person. This is the formula. This is the approach. Or you need to have, if it's just wacky, if it's just a wacky by themselves, it doesn't work as well. And two wacky working off each other usually doesn't work as well either. Formula. Yeah, Jordian Data is actually a good example of this, believe it or not. Excuse me. So he portrays a good straight man. Now, there's an important thing, though, and this is extremely important, and you'll notice they establish this in his first scene. So he whips out, he says, yes, let's try 15% more of this, and usually that's the sign of, oh, it's the boring guy, right? But then he says, hey, check it out, we've got all this cool stuff here. Let me show you this gag. And Pinky's like, what if it did this instead? And he immediately jumps on that. He's like, oh, that's a good idea. We'd have to do this and this and this and this. And I love the way that they portray this. This man is literally a humor enthusiast. He's a geek. The way he's expressing it is different, but he is still into it. And yeah, as Rasker points out, he's the implementer. She says, what if the jacket wetters you instead of the flower? He says, good idea. We'll have to get some tubing going and get this. He figures out how to make the gag work. And the whole time, he's very clearly like gushing in his own more subdued manner about the jokes that they're coming up with and about the gags. Like, look at his expression when he pulls off the thing off of the banana peel and just starts sliding around. And then when it finally comes in, he says, what'd you think? You know, he's very Mod light. He's not as severe as Mod, but he is definitely leaning in that direction because there is still clear enthusiasm there. He's just not bouncing off the walls about it. This also makes a good way in how he bounces off of Pinky. And consequently, cheese sandwich, but we'll get to that in a minute. So all of this works really, really well. He is an incredibly well-implemented character, and I'll keep commenting on him as we go forwards. By the way, real quick side note. Did you notice that Pinkie Pie, each of Pinkie Pie's ideas for his gags is what we call a subversion of expectations, which is a subdivision of the non sequitur. I actually decided to write down an idea to explain what that is, in the off chance anybody needs me to tell that. So a non sequitur is, in the literalist sense of the words, my water's almost out, so I need to go change the car tires. Now that's not funny, because non sequitur is not intended necessarily to be funny. A non sequitur is the overall category. The subdivision is the subversion thereof. When you introduce A and then it's going to be B, I give you the perfect example of subversion humor, a cute, fluffy bunny who absolutely destroys and kills people en masse. See Monty Python if you don't get the reference. Yes, Monty Python is very much the king of subversion humor. It was one of their biggest shticks. And yeah, everything she suggests, make it so that the shirt squirts you instead of the flour, make it so that the banana is sticky instead of slippery. These are all approaches to that. And she'll be doing this fairly consistently as we go forwards. So, subversion humor. Okay, cool. Then she goes up and she sees Weird Al himself. Now, Weird Al, Cheese, has lost his ability to laugh. Now, an interesting little side note. You'll notice they make it a point that it's not that he's a good voice actor. I mean, he's a good actor in general. The man's incredibly talented. You'll notice that they make it a point that he understands humor. He just can't laugh. This is actually its own distinction. This is called understanding something intellectually without feeling it emotionally. I'm sure you can think of several examples of that right off the top of your head. Where it's like, well, I get what they're going for, I just don't feel it, right? It's more of a distant and disconnected factoid rather than a more personal element of what you're in. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with that unless you're in this specific situation where there is absolutely something wrong with it. Also, Boneless doesn't even recognize me anymore. By the way, that particular form of humor where the camera warps over and then the chair turns, that is called comedic timing. There's no actual joke on display. The only joke is the exact timing by which things happen in reaction to things that are being said. Yes, I'm going to break down a lot of the humor of this episode. Sucks to be you. So, he does his, by the way, quick aside, just really funny while we're here. The piñata gag they show in his flashback where the filly is trying to hit the thing, that is also the subversion of expectations humor. It is actually the bat he gave her, which is the piñata. Haha. Yes, I need to get even more boring sounding. Hang on, let me really get into this here. I have a note here where I say Weird Al is nice, but I really like Sans here. They do a really good job of his portrayal. He is consistently portrayed as a positive influence. He is extraordinarily well written and acted. I'm not actually joking when I say Sans by himself is going to drag up the score of this episode, I think. No joke. Either way, what we then see is her attempt. Now, this is funny, because what Pinky does, yes, I agree, Pinky is actually well written this whole episode. It's always nice to see her actually well written instead of, like I said earlier, stupid and quirky, or rude and quirky, which always pisses me off. But she says we're going to start with the basics. What she then does is she does several attempts at slapstick humor, in conjunction no less. What's funny is, I know that you probably don't care, but screw you, I'm going to talk about it anyways. That's actually true. That's actually comedic science on display there. Remember how I talk a lot about the types of approach when it comes to appeal? This isn't just humor. This applies in every way, right? Like, there's science fiction just as a general category. A lot of people like sci-fi, but only a few people like, you know, spaceships kind of thing, or only a few people like the psychic thing, or the temporal thing, or whatever, and you can just spike up like this. I've used this analogy a lot. It's the same with humor. Broad humor is called that because it is the most broad category and the least funny. More people will find it funny, but they will find it less funny than a more well-crafted, precise, niche humor. Sense make? So, what does she do? Slapstick, which is the most primal, most basic form of humor that we understand to exist. Again, I'm not making this up. I have actually studied this topic. Slapstick is the bare bones. Now, that's not to say slapstick is not something that can't be done well. As several people have pointed out over the years, and I myself agree with this statement, the Three Stooges took slapstick to a science. They knew exactly what they were doing and how they were doing it. And if you're paying attention, they were also doing comedic timing in addition to slapstick. Because they weren't just slapping each other with pies, they were doing it with a very specific tempo. If you've ever seen the Three Stooges, you know what I mean by this. Boom, 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 pa, boom. And there's this wonderful pace to how they do it, which adds to the slapstick. But I'm getting off topic. So, naturally, it makes perfect sense for her to start at the basics. There's nothing more basic than slapstick. And I don't mean that as an insult. I mean, that's the ground floor. That's bedrock. That's where you start building your humor, right? It doesn't get a laugh out of him. Okay, this makes sense, all things considered. So, all right, let's go even more basic and let's work on smiling, which leads to this is actually, if you're paying attention, a subtrope of subversion humor. This is when you see something that's supposed to be A but actually is B. Now that may sound like subversion humor, but subversion humor is when you expect A and get B. This is a little bit different because this is we've seen this several times in this very show. Why don't you go ahead and... Luna. This actually happened with Luna and a smile, actually, now that I'm thinking about it. There's a scene where Luna's like, go give us a smile. Huh? Okay, that's horrifying. Don't do that again. Something that is supposed to be a good thing turns into a horrible thing through context. So you can see how it's like a subdivision of the subversion humor. And this is what we see with Cheese's horrifically nightmarish smile. Still continuing with that same overall approach. I get the feeling that's kind of the actual writers of this episode's main understanding of humor, and nothing wrong with that. It's just kind of funny that they keep hitting that same note over and over. Anyways, so then they do this thing where like, hang on, we're going to go ahead and show you the science of funny. Pinky has a line, how do you science funny? Without even thinking about it, I immediately answered in my head, the same way you science everything. I am a very firm believer of the fact that everything can be scienced down and broken down and understood as long as you do it properly. Now, it takes some work and some effort, but you'll notice how Sans actually bothered to say there's no unified theory of gag, no unified gag theory, excuse me. Obviously, that itself is humor. That is a joke he is telling to us, the audience. But he's also right. There is no such thing as the perfect joke. There is no such thing as humor that everyone will get. That's not how that works. That's why the whole concept of specific niche and broad humor exists. It's really weird seeing how much they did their homework on this episode with regards to humor. But then they show off a couple of gags. The combination gag. This is also a form of humor. This is a real thing. You take one type of joke and a second type of joke and you merge them into a third type of joke. Or the rule of threes, which is usually referred to as introduce, expand, payoff. Repetition humor or callback humor is very similar to this, but this is a very, 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 very old rule, but it is a very common rule, and it works even to this very day. You introduce the joke, you expand upon the joke, you pay off the joke, and the third time is supposed to be the big one, the moment in which it actually works. All of this stuff is actual humor science. Then Pinky does the montage, also takes 2 more approaches at subversion humor, if you're paying attention. And this is finally when they're like, okay, we give up. This is when Sans really starts to earn his medal, in my opinion. I've already been loving him the whole episode. But here he says, no, sir, you can't surrender. Like, he actually gives enough of a damn to insist that Cheese needs to keep going with this. Not for his own selfish reasons. And there's this wonderful bit. I, too, am horrified. There's this wonderful bit where she says, you're not going to close down the factory, are you? I thought this was Cheese's purpose. And he says, it certainly was mine. First of all, ouch. But second of all, but if Mr. Sandwich has finally given up, there's only so long we can retool his old ideas before we run out of gags to produce. Damn. And that is why Equestria is better than real life, right there. In one sentence. If I'm ever asked why I say Equestria is better than real life, I'm going to point to that freaking sentence. I want you to think about that. I don't think it's a meta-commentary on the show ending. I think that's just a meta-commentary on corporations in general. I mean, honestly, think about that. Really think about that for a minute. Think about how many different industries and how many different ways that applies to. Food, entertainment, music, I mean, chairs, you know, video games. Just, God, it's the whole gamut. It's the whole gamut. This then leads to a bit where he comments, maybe you can stay here, Pinky. And she says, no, I need to make ponies laugh in real time. A wonderful line, actually, because it illustrates the difference between a painter and an architect. And this is exactly what Weows just brought up in chat. The painter is more about the art. They want to paint the building. The architect is more about the building. They want to build the building. They want to design it and make it work. Neither of these are wrong and neither of these are right, but they are very different approaches to very different concepts, even though both are resulting in this building. Yes, Sans is the architect, and Cheese Sandwich and Pinky are the painters. They want to make the art. The old example I like to use of this way back in the day, back when I was more of a geek and less, competent, is this is the difference between a speedrunner of a video game and a tasser of a video game. But I'm not going to go into that because you get the idea. So, they go ahead and come up with a concept and they're like, all right, you need to make us laugh and everything's cool. By the way, this is a good time to mention that Sans Smirk's cutie mark is a wet blanket. That's probably the best joke in the entire episode, by the way. So, we get a Weird Al song, which honestly I don't have much to say about. I've already slotted it immediately next to the other Weird Al song. A little bit above it, because Weird Al is Weird Al, and most of his songs are actually fairly similar in overall construction. The compromise at the end of the episode is honestly kind of duh, once we understand the circumstances. Cheese goes out and does. He paints, he designs, and he comes up with ideas which he sends back to the factory, who can then make things and actually produce things. Both sides are happy, both sides are doing their own thing, and that's all cool. I'm reminded a little bit, I was actually wondering this earlier, how many of you have read and or watched Harry Potter? Because I'm sure at least some of you have. Since, there's a bit where they go, George and Fred, I'm going to say this as non-spoiler as I can, they start their own gag shop. They start their own shop, which they have invented gags in, jokes that they can go in. And the way that they describe that is partially what I was thinking of here. Because if you notice, they're kind of in the same book. While they are smart and intelligent enough in order to run something like this, they would similarly hate working in a factory. They need to actually be there in their shop, making their stuff and seeing people's reaction to it. So they found their own compromise. That's the mom and pop shop, right? Just another one that kind of occurred to me a little bit. Anyways, moving on a little bit. So then we get to Pinky's purpose in life. Now, I actually want to talk about this for just a moment. Pinky's purpose in life is to be Pinky, to make people laugh, to be a painter. On the one hand, duh. I'm pretty sure we figured this out a while ago. But on the other hand, and I don't even think they did this on purpose, this is actually a really good message. It's a message that fiction needs to apply way more. One second. Let me really try to illustrate what I'm talking about here. How many works of fiction, movie, book, show, video game, have you seen or played where the main characters are big dramatic heroes who save the day or fight against insurmountable odds and are otherwise large-scale characters? Larger than life, you might even say. You already see where I'm going with this. It makes perfect sense that most of fiction centers on that because most of fiction is designed to be a bit of an escape from everyday real life. Not all of it is, of course. There's plenty of room for all different kinds of fiction. But yeah, the ridiculous majority of fiction centers around the big and the bold. And it's because most people want that. There is what I believe to be an unnecessary side consequence of that. And that is the fact that it builds in the I'm going to go ahead and say probably unintentional message that that's the norm. That that's what you should shoot for. That if you don't actually accomplish something in your life, then what's the point of you? If you're not some big person, or if you're not some successful person with your own house, your own car, and are actually doing well and are moving up the ladder, or got your own shop, or painting your own things and selling other things, then what's wrong with you? I've seen this in my lifetime in a lot of people who all suffer from a form or another of depression from the fact that they are comparing themselves to these heroic fictional characters. Not literally. Most people I know aren't literally getting depressed because they're not Superman, but rather because they themselves are not what they would call successful. They have not made it big. They don't run a boutique. They have not joined the Wonderbolts. They just make people laugh around the town. Catch! The big point that most fiction misses is there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with being someone who just hangs out and makes people laugh at parties. There's nothing wrong with being someone who is a janitor, to use a personal example. Yeah, this is what the Pillars thought Stygian was doing, to continue to tie it into that. But there's nothing wrong with what Stygian was, either. He didn't get as much glory, but he was just as essential. It is my opinion that this message here, that Pinky's ambition has actually already been fulfilled, even though it's small, and I'm definitely putting that in quote-unquotes, that doesn't make it any less. It just means it's different. Excuse me. And this is something that I do feel an enormous amount of fiction skips over, and it's nice to see that, however, most likely unintentionally within this very episode. Because the episode does bother to put her alongside her compatriots, who have accomplished big things, and also showed that she has accomplished a small thing, and how relevant that still is. And yeah, I was going to say, we've actually seen this several times before. Pinky has been shown to be a crucial and critical role, despite just being a janitor. Either way, we now have to review the episode. So I'm thinking straight purple. No, put my notes here. So yes, this is by the Fox duo. Brothers? I don't know. I don't know who these people are. I would honestly say that orange is probably the floor for me. I couldn't go below orange. This is a very tightly constructed episode that kind of stumbles at a few points, but nevertheless does its work, its homework, in actually discussing and talking about the science of laughter, while also introducing a guest character who is actually awesome, while also having Weird Al Yankovic in his usual song excellence, while also being an episode about Pinkie Pie that's not about her being stupid or rude. It's well written for her, it's well written for the guest stars, and the biggest flaw with the episode, and this does drag it down, I think, is that its core plot point is barely addressed. The theme I just mentioned, I imagine most people wouldn't even catch that from it. I'm not, it's assuming it's even intentional, which I'm not sure about. Here's another example. Who gets the praise in the army? The general or the quartermaster? Bonus question. Who runs the army? The quartermaster or the general? Sorry. I was reminded because of the song that's playing right now. Anyways. I do agree with you, Imperial Star Destroyer. That's why I'm kind of debating. Like, it's weird because this is, let's call it what it is, this is a filler episode. There's really not much to it other than the fact that it's filler. And it's just kind of, okay. But it's good filler. Actually, I have Ect. Which is funny when you think about it. I wasn't thinking about that when I was making that reference, but you're right. I mean, the biggest time I've talked about how important a quartermaster is was all the way back in Assassin's Creed 4 when we were doing the Assassin's Creed lore run. I spent like 10 minutes discussing why the quartermaster is the most important and powerful person on the ship. This is why Adewale wanted the job. I'm going to go ahead and give this red. I know that's going to hackle some people. But I really do feel like the core elements of this episode are at the very least well constructed enough to deserve that. As I said, I would say orange is the floor for me personally, but I think I'm going to go ahead and push it up there. Which is funny because this is not the first red they've made. They also did Discordant Harmony, as well as Gift of the Mod Pie. So, next week, what are we covering next week? 246 Great and Trivial Pursuit. That should be funny, whatever that episode is. But that'll be next week. For now, I'm going to go ahead and rest my throat and get some work done. So, I'll see you next time. I'll see the rest of you Tuesday for more of FF14.